Beware, beware, beware. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Bill here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm on an early morning hike. The sun's just come over the mountaintop. And this is going to be a relatively short hike today. Probably about, I'm thinking maybe between 10 and 11 miles. So, before I get into the more adversive part of this video, let me talk about something really positive. My last video actually drew a lot of attention, and I was astonished about the number of people who are in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s who are still out hiking. I received so many comments from people, and many of the people that are out hiking are people who actually have overcome some pretty significant physical problems. So good on everybody. It's great to hear that there are so many people in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s that are still out there hiking. And like me, many are hiking alone. And that takes me to the point of today's video. 3 days ago, I was on a 15-mile hike in these mountains, and I took a really serious fall on the trail. I want to tell you a little bit about it. Most of these trails that I'm hiking on near my home are all the remnants of glacial moraines, which means that there's a lot of rocks on these trails. And you've actually heard me in some of my videos complain about how many rocks there are. And I was about 12 and a half miles into the hike, and there was this rock that had just poked up enough out of the soil that it caught the front of my left boot, and it started to pitch me forward off balance. And initially, things happen in nanoseconds in those kinds of situations. And initially, I wasn't actually all that concerned, because I had my hiking stick with me, my hiking pole with me, and boy, a lot of sun through here. And the reason I carry it is to help me in those situations. But the problem was, as I was pitching forward, I planted into my hiking stick into an area that unfortunately had a lot of gravel. And with my full weight on the hiking stick, the stick gave out and then sent me flying forward. I was on a downhill section of trail, but it wasn't a severe downhill section, but it sent me pitching forward. And my whole body slammed into the ground. Now, I want to be clear about this. I don't want to be overly dramatic about this. The fall that I took was more like a high diving slide into second base, as opposed to, a bowling ball being dropped out of a window. But I hit hard enough that it really left me stunned. Now, fortunately, I still have a fairly decent amount of strong upper body muscle tissue because of how much time I spend in the gym. And my muscles really did a reasonably good job of absorbing the force of the impact. It didn't even knock the wind out of me. But as I said, it did leave me significantly stunned. And so I'm laying on the ground, and I pitch forward, my body hits, my face hits, left side of my face hits, and I'm just kind of laying there, and I again, because I was stunned, I'm just laying there, and I probably laid there for about 35, 45 seconds. And then, you know, as is instinct for most people, the first thing I wanted to do was get up. And I found that I couldn't get up. And I remember thinking to myself, in one of those nanoseconds, I remember thinking to myself, you know, I've heard about this situation of older people falling and not being able to get up, but it confused me. Again, it confused me because I do have really good upper body strength. And I took stock of myself, and I don't know how this happened. I have no recall of how this happened, but I was on a trail that was probably about, at least at that point, it was probably at least 9 feet wide. And I was walking down the center of the trail when my shoe caught that rock. And when I finished this fall, somehow I was almost perpendicular to the trail. And I just have no recall of how that happened. But when I couldn't get up, I took stock of myself. But when I couldn't get up, I took stock of myself, and I realized that half of my body was off the trail from my belt down, and my legs were entangled in the brush that was on the side of the trail. So I extricated my legs, was able to kind of wiggle up onto the trail. The other problem I was having getting up was that my hands really hurt. The bottom of my hands really hurt. So it was tough for me to plant them. But I was able to extricate my legs and bring them up and raise my hips so that my knees were perpendicular to my hips, and I lifted my upper body to like a top push-up position. And I just held that position for probably easily another 2 minutes, just, you know, shaking off the cobwebs and taking stock of my body. I kept telling myself repeatedly, you're not hurt, because I could move my fingers, I could move my toes, and I didn't have any sharp pain. So after about 2 minutes, I stood right up and no problem, until I stood up. And then I started getting a pretty, you know, a decent enough pain in my left kneecap. And I looked down and I realized that when I fell, somehow I had banged my left kneecap into a rock on the trail. And I also somehow had bruised the bottom of my thumb where it meets the body of my hand. So those were initially the only two real casualties, and they weren't bad. I mean, the knee pain on a scale of 1 to 10 was about a 4. I was getting some very slight swelling, and again, the thumb problem on a scale of 1 to 10 was probably maybe a 5. So they weren't bad problems. But then, as I stood up, I looked down at my hands, and both of my hands were covered in blood. And the problem was, and by the way, I don't want to make this sound over dramatic. It's not like I had deep incisions in my hands. The problem is that when I pitched forward, I put my hands out in front of me, and they went into the rocks, and they slid into the rocks. So I was bleeding out of scrapes on my hands, and the bleeding stopped pretty quickly. And in fact, the only real casualty of the fall, as you can see, I'm wearing a different pair of sunglasses today. The only real casualty of the fall was that I broke my sunglasses, my Oakleys, one of my pairs of Oakleys. And also, I had said before that my face hit the ground. But the positive part about that was that the bill of my cap came over and protected my face. It fell over my face while I fell. So there wasn't any real cutting. The only part of my face that actually grazed against the earth was the was the left side, and I didn't have any cuts. So I was in fairly good shape, and proceeded to continue on with the hike and finish the remaining 3.5 miles of the hike without a problem. In fact, I actually took a small detour toward the end of the hike to make the hike longer, because I definitely wanted it to be at least 15 miles, and finished without incident. The only residual, the next day I was a little bit sore, but the only residual from all of this was I somehow ended up with a silver dollar sized bruise on about the 6 o'clock position right next to my kneecap. And it was fine. But the point I want to make about this is that I was very familiar with the trail that I was on. I've probably hiked it, that particular section of trail I was on, I've probably hiked it 20 times. I was pretty familiar with it. And it doesn't matter how good your planning is. It doesn't matter how good your equipment is. You know, poop can still happen on the trail. And so one of the things that I want to say to you all, particularly older hikers, is take a second, and I'm sure most of you have done this, if not all of you, but take a second, particularly those of you who hike alone, take a second and review your safety plan with yourself. I can't get any light here. Review your safety plan for yourself. Make sure that you have one. I actually had a double redundant safety plan if I had been incapacitated. But again, what I'd suggest is think your safety plan, because bad stuff can happen at unpredictable times. By the way, relative to my hands and the bleeding on my hands, I carry a full safety kit in my backpack and a boo-boo kit on my belt pack. And, you know, I didn't even bother to stop and clean it off. About a mile down the trail, I ran into a spring that I knew was there, and I just washed my hands off completely. And so this brings me to the second part of my video. As we get older, we have legitimate medical concerns that we focus our attention on. We get worried about the possibility of stroke from high blood pressure. We get worried about cancer. We get worried about dementia, all of which are legitimate concerns as a part of the aging process. One factor that I think gets seriously overlooked is the issue of senior falling. I have a relative who fell, I believe, in their kitchen. And not only did they tear up their rotator cuff, but they actually fractured the collar joint in their shoulder. I also had a friend in her mid-70s who loved tiny dogs, small dogs. And one night she got up to get a drink of water and tripped over the small dog, broke her hip, and within a month she was in a assisted living facility for the rest of her life. One of my members of my board of directors, he actually played Big Ten football. When he was 73, he fell and cracked a couple of fractured, I think 3 of his ribs as a result of the fall, and he passed within 6 months. So this issue of falling as seniors is something we need to pay serious attention to. Now, generally speaking, in many cases, the reason that we fall is because we've lost muscle tissue in our legs. Our legs basically counteract the movement that we experience when we get off balance. But the great news about that is that you can continue to build leg muscle and tone your leg muscles throughout your entire life, into your 80s and 90s. So if you're watching this video, you know how to use YouTube. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there that will teach you what to do to strengthen your legs and offset the possibility of falling. So before I close, one other thing I want to say is that if you like this content of hiking into your mid-70s, there are 3 of my videos I'd like to call attention to for you. At 71, I hiked the Grand Canyon rim to rim, north to south. At 72, I did the same thing south to north, did the dreaded south to north route. And just last September, I did the rim to river to rim hike. I'll list those videos down below in the narrative section. You may want to pay attention to them. I think you might find them interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was it'll be helpful for you. And if you like the content in the channel, please consider subscribing. I haven't talked a lot about this, but one of my goals, if I can get YouTube to monetize my channel, is to be able to shift the funding, if they pay me, into a memorial scholarship fund for a fallen firefighter. So please consider subscribing. And again, thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you on the trail.